feel like everybody's right and everybody's wrong.
100%. Why is this important? Why are we even going here? He's helped a lot of guys. He's also not had success with a lot of guys.
Come in with a purpose, and they're very intentional with what they do and how they do it.
From the majors to the sandlot, baseball and softball share space in one place. Welcome to the farm system.
People liking to move a certain way because this is the type of athlete that they are, and then training them to just do that more versus training them to move a way that we view or a lot of people would view is more beneficial to get results rather than just how they like to move. We've had a lot of high school kids in particular. Hey, this is the type of athlete you are, so why train to do anything different? Why do this, right? And so, like, for example, hey, you like to spin, so let's just double down on that. Let's just make you better at spinning, right? And then, okay, cool, sure, you like to spin, but can we train you to spin less because that's going to get you better results in game? A production in game production, rather than, okay, sure, maybe you can hit some balls harder in the cage if you just spin a little bit harder. But when, you're mixing speeds, locations, the game's 9-on-1, you have to hit it in between two foul lines. Like, does that really get more production? And so that topic kind of come up, and we've been talking about it quite a bit. So,
I mean, I think there's some foundational things that are really important along with it. Like, so you have things like, you have perspectives like motor preference. You also got, looking at like Greg Rose and those guys have been talking about this for years about like, asking a player to do something that they physically can't do within the moment and how frustrating that could be as a coach. Absolutely. Like, okay, you get all these things. So like, I want to, break into those, how those things are also different comparatively to people's perceptions of what that stuff actually means. And then also on top of that as well. And also too, like, first off, me and Greg Rose, like, good friends. I disagree with him on stuff. Me and Matt Swope, great, good friends. Me and him disagree on stuff. Me and Greg Rose agree on a lot of things, right? Like, me and Matt Swope agree on a large portion of things, right? And also too, along with that, right, if we're all in the same cage working with the same hitter and like we're seeing the results along with it, like both those guys are also big learners, and also just the lifelong learners. But also I was going to say this as well, like, this isn't like Matt Swope's thing, right? Like, there's, he's got a whole bunch of guys like behind him that are like skill acquisition, biomechanists that also know, again, guys have backgrounds in anatomy and like that's their lives too. So it's not, one person's thing or another. Same thing with Greg, like he's had a lot of people pour into him. But I think the big thing that is there's a big difference, right? Because look, here's the thing. We love, as individuals, we love to be told and affirmed that what we could just want to do more of what we want to do, right? I mean, it doesn't matter if it's, again, I would love to eat ice cream and I would love to be able to, snack late at night and do all those other things and like, wake up with a six-pack. Like, again, like that would be awesome, right? But also at the same time, like that's just not how it works, right? And then also too, the same exact way, like when we look at that for, across the board. When I was in high school, people forget this. Like, it's like, I feel like people forget what it was like being in high school. When I was in high school and I was hitting batting practice, all I wanted to do was hit home runs the whole time. If I could spin and hit home runs the whole time, I would do it. Like, I would love to do that, right? I needed a coach, right? Shout out to Coach Norris, right? Shout out to my boy, right? I needed a coach to tell me, hey, dude, you're 125 pounds, right? 5'6" at the time, right? Like, you're 5'6", 125 pounds. Like, maybe stop trying to spin on balls and try to hit homers, because that's not going to be your game, and you're not going to be very successful right now in your career with those current things. There is global standards that the game has, or requirements that the game has. Like, again, great, you could even hit the ball harder, faster, all these other things. Bat speeds are higher, all these things. But again, you're hitting ground balls, right? You're popping up more, even though it makes you move faster, even though that, again, like you process things faster, just because, again, all of those things. Or even too, I would love to tell you, right? Like, we talked about this, me and Greg have talked about this, and like we've kind of gone back in some different ways. What Greg is saying is like, okay, let's say we're in a session, right? And a coach is sitting there cueing a player to do something within their hip, right? And let's say they're just purely just a typical hitting coach that doesn't do any prep work, that doesn't do any tissue work, that doesn't understand biomechanics, that doesn't understand kinesiology, that doesn't understand skill acquisition, that doesn't understand all these things. Just a coach that literally is just like, look, I played when I played, and now I'm coaching. And again, along with that, I'm trying to get this player to do this move. Okay. What Greg is saying is like, if their body physically can't pick up, like say, we're in the weight room. They physically can't pick up 400 pounds right now. They can't deadlift 400 pounds. He's saying you're not going to be able to cue them into picking up 400 pounds right now because their tissue and their, again, CNS and all those other things, they're not trained to be able to do that. So you're going to get really frustrated as a coach, and the player's going to get really frustrated because you have a skill coach that is trying to give you something that your body physically can't do. Okay. Whole nother thing. Now, Greg is what me and Greg also talked about, and obviously he's a big, member of not only their assessments that they take, but there's ways of fixing those deficiencies. We can train the body and get stronger, faster, more, flexible, more mobile, more, all these things. Like we can train certain fascial slings, and try to isolate them a little bit more or target them a little bit more. We can do things like, again, like the tissue doesn't have free will. I know sometimes it can feel like, man, my hip's always going to be like this. Man, my back's always going to hurt. Man, this is always going to happen. Man, I'm always going to have this problem in my swing, right? But it's like, they can be fixed. Like the body doesn't have free will. Like the tissue, if you stretch it, it's going to get longer, right? If you contract it all the time, it's going to get shorter. Like it's like, again, like the tissue is going to it's going to respond to the demand that you're placing upon the body. Now there's obviously at a spectrum of like how far that can actually go based on a lot of genetic factors, and like also, the type of training you're doing and how good the coaching is, and like all of those things, right? Like all go together. But again, also moving that into like movement preference stuff, right? Yes. Like, and I think there's a big difference. The same thing. I think me and Swope are well aligned with the thought of guys not spinning off the ball. Now, some guys need to rotate more than other guys, for sure, right? Like some guys are going to have more T-spine, more laxity in their body. They're going to have more range of motion in their pelvis. They're going to have more of these other things where they're going to have bigger moves. They're like, for example, it's always been known, like some guys are going to be like more, and it sounds bad now because he's not the greatest. Let's pick somebody else. Let's say like Mookie Betts instead. I usually say Josh Donaldson, but he's not playing great. So like, let's say Mookie Betts, right? Some guys have more laxity across their body, right? And also too, they're going to need more stretch, counter rotation, all these other things, because they have, from a tissue standpoint, they're much more, or connective tissue standpoint, they're much more, there's more slack in the slings. Great. But then you also have guys like Trout, guys like Bregman, guys like, I'm trying to think of a whole bunch of tight guys off the top of my head, right? Goldsmith, like, like all these guys, right, that are really tight, that are not going to be able to do moves like Mookie Betts. And if they try to do moves like Mookie Betts, or even too, like, like even Freddie Freeman, for example, like they talked about that the other day, like Freddie Freeman and Mookie were sitting next to each other, and it's like, how much you guys talk about hitting? And then they're like, well, they actually kind of more talk about global topics of like what the guy's throwing and approaches and all these other things, because they hit very different. One's a lefty, one's a righty, one's really tight, one's really loose, one's really athletic, one's not so athletic. One's, like they have different ways of how they actually go about hitting. One's really vertical, right? Other one tends to be, like Mookie's a little bit of both, but like, again, more than often it's like, Freddie on the same side of that, right, is more like, a lot of people classify him as like uppercutty, or however you want to, swings up, or whatever you guys want to classify him as. Again, some different movements and capabilities and things that they're able to do, along with that, right? So I think that that's a interesting play, and I think that that's like a good foundation from there, is just like understanding those things, as well as just like from a foundation. It's like it almost might feel like it's like when I'm gonna of course use a Bible reference. It's almost like we're reading the Bible and you're like, I feel like these contradict each other, and like they're actually more aligned. You just like don't know enough, all right? Or again, you're hearing bits and pieces from like a conversation, and you think that things like necessarily aren't aligning. But there is some things within those moments where I've disagreed strongly with, something that like a snippet that, Greg Rose might put out, or, movement preference, or, like Swope or one of those guys might have put out as well. And there's, but there's a lot more alignment than not.
Yeah. And I think going to one of the points you said is like the evaluation process and the testing of the athletes is super important. Because I mean, we do the same thing. We put them on a force plate.
Yeah.
We have them hit on a force plate, and then we collect their ground forces, and we look at it. And I mean, I know you've done this a couple of times, and I do this as well with some of the hitters. It's like, hey, like you came in for an eval on Friday. you play this weekend. We understand how all this information can sound to a hitter.
Yep.
Because it can be a lot of information, a lot of the ground force data. Hey, this weekend, and then, everybody wants something right now, right? It's like, well, okay, like we play tomorrow though. What are you going to do? It's like, okay, well, I'm looking at the force play data. It's like, well, you're better off to get up on the plate and just try to pull something, like let it eat. Like you're spinning, like you're creating a lot of torque in one way. Like you're just better off that to be your approach. But also in the macro, understand like you're in 8th grade, you're going to get ready to go play high school ball next year. That approach isn't going to work against, Gorman. They're just going to keep throwing sliders to you, low and away, and you're not going to hit it with that approach, right?
Yeah.
And
or you could do that approach on a middle inside, fastball at 85, but you're not doing that against 92.
Agreed, right? And then you got to, what are their goals? What does that align with? Like, hey, I want to go play D1. Okay, well, like you're going to get away with this in high school, but you're not going to get away with that if you're going to go play at a D1, right? So like we're going to train you to get better and like fix some of those compensations that you have, so that you can try to compete at that level in the future, right? Rather than just, okay, this is the athlete that you are. We're just going to let you be the athlete that you are. And, hopefully they throw it inside and they make a mistake, right? And so that part too is like, the eval process is super, super important. And then understanding too is like, when it comes to training, and we say this all the time, is like, it's a journey, right? There's a micro, right? We got game this weekend. And this is what our approach, this is what our game plan is this weekend or this month or whatever, because this is how you're moving. But also, too, you're a sophomore and you have 3 years of high school left before you go to college. Like, there's also a macro and that big picture of what we're working on. And, like, obviously, we want to get results now and we want to do this. But, there's also the level that you want to go to and the results that you're going to need at that level and where you need to be to have results at that level, too, that we're also working towards. And so, understanding that as well, when it comes to some of the stuff that I think, just in my experience too, is like, I have family that have been in baseball for a long time, and I know people and like they're not as into like our methodologies, or not into, but they don't understand the body the way that, you definitely, they don't understand it to your level or even like my level, and some other people's level. But me being here, they are more willing to listen, obviously, just me being a family member. But like you look at that and they don't understand some of the methods to our madness, right? It's like, well, why do you have them doing this, this, and this? That seems like a lot. It's like, there could be a lot to grasp, but when you look at, the body as a system and you look at the macro as well as the micro, all that stuff starts to make a lot more sense. But again, that's a long process to get to that point where you're like, I mean, even to this point, that happened the other day and then this is where people have to understand. I've been in a cage with you probably as much, if not more than anybody the last couple of years, I would say. Definitely the last couple of years, I've been here and then shadowing you and then training with you and then trained while you've observed me and stuff. And so if there's anyone that's like currently that's been around you more, and then there's still moments where you'll do something and I'll be like, yeah, wouldn't have done that. Didn't understand that. Like, why'd you do that? Right. And then there's sometimes too where you're like, oh, like, why'd you give him that cue? Right. It worked, but why'd you give that cue? Right. And we're with each other more than anybody else is, with me or with you or with Nicole. Right. And so again, it's going to happen where if you post something or someone sees something on social media that they're not going to understand, I see you on a daily basis and watch you train all of them and hear the conversations you have with all of them. And I still sometimes I'm like, because your experience and, your past of working with hitters and all the information that you've accumulated and the journey that you've had as a coach, like it's different than mine. And there's going to be, even though we're pretty well aligned, I would say, with a lot of our ideologies, like there's some ways that you'll go about fixing that problem that I'm just like, whoa, like I wouldn't have thought of that, or whatever. And so again, it's going to happen on social media where people are, there's going to be a misinterpretation of what we're teaching because they don't have context, right?
And again, like a thing along with that, like I was actually just talking to a pretty good strength coach the other day, and we're talking about that, like from, if you have an S&C lens, when you see us doing a whole bunch of staggered stance stuff and you see us doing a whole bunch of things where like one of the legs is working behind the body, or it's firing towards the front of the body, or one of those things. From an S&C lens, like a lot of strength coaches will connect with it a lot more because they understand like what we're doing from a body and a tissue standpoint, and like what we're training the body to be able to do from a fascial system, like all of these things that come into it, right? But if you're just a random coach that's just been going by, because you got to think about this too. If somebody randomly came and watched you coach, like anybody, doesn't matter who you are, like what level you're at coaching, you have some level of expertise within it, right? Some random, Joe Schmo off the street, if he comes in and watches you train a hitter, they're going to be like, well, why did you do that drill or whatever, right? And they just see the results of it, or they see, a thing, and they're like, oh, like, again, they have a method to their madness or whatever, they're going along with it. It's just understanding that, right? That there's like, we like to do this thing too, where there's always this perspective of like, it's like, I was saying this other day, it's like, you got to get past the point of like defending your hill. Like you're not defending your hill. Like what I know today doesn't define me. I don't care about what I even know. The whole point is like the same thing with it is like, that doesn't define me like as a person, or it's like, I don't care about like all the information. I bet you again, 10 years from now, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I'm doing today that I won't be doing then, or I'll find a better way, or it's not even that necessarily that it's a bad thing. It's just like, I found a more efficient way of getting to the same spot. So instead I go a different route, or I have a different way of skill acquisition that I'm like, I'm going to use this combo instead to get there. Right. And so like, that's also a very different thing. And also too, like my brain just processes information quick. So like I can move on, collect data, see how people are moving in shapes and things that are being created. And then I'll move on and I understand it from a different level or from a different lens. And I start doing something different with that type of mover or what's going on. But I think the big thing of just like kind of going back with that as well is like, let's say like one of the things I brought up to Greg Rose and those guys like, but as a coach, I'm constantly asking my player to do something that they can't do currently. Like that, I'm always pushing them, like psychologically, I'm always pushing them to a different spot than where they currently are right now. Like you guys as staff, I'm always asking you to do something that is going to challenge you and make you go somewhere different than where you currently are right now, right? I'm doing the same thing with myself, right? Okay, now you take into that, like from a tissue standpoint, if you're doing mobility work, you're asking your tissue to do something that it doesn't want to do, that it naturally wouldn't go into those ranges. And again, like along with it, I'm trying to isolate that and create that adaptation, for it to happen. That's going to be a thing that I'm always asking. So a lot of our things too, like when we're training connective tissue, which is a lot of the things that we're doing inside the cage. That's why I always say on the same side of that, like if you don't understand reciprocal movement, if you don't understand, fascial slings, if you don't like our stuff is going to look wild, right? Because again, it's so contrary, to like a lot of just basic, understandings of the body, right? And again, along with that, like most people don't even know, basic S&C, let alone, fascial stuff is all like, cutting edge in the last like 10 years or so. There's stuff reporting back where it went mainstream like in the last like 10 years or so. And I guess I wouldn't even, I don't know, mainstream in what communities, but the whole point is like along with it, like I did talk to a S&C guy last year that was like, all that fascia stuff is just another way to make money. I'm like, all right, boy. But the other, I think pieces with that is like, that's what my argument's been. It's like, yes. And I get where, Greg is talking about from, like, cause there's a lot of coaches out there that are literally just skill coaches and they don't understand. They're trying to get this guy to do this move with their hip and they can't do it. And he's getting frustrated with the player. And it's like, well, you don't listen, or like they start coming up with every excuse in the book of like why that adaptation is not happening. And Greg is making the point that it's like, dude, like his body tissue wise literally can't do that. But we're asking them to do those things, but we're also knowing where the edge, we know that they struggle with that, or they have a restriction in this way, or they have these X, Y, and Z, but we're doing this drill specifically. And you've heard me constantly tell these players all the time. It's like, hey, like, I know you're going to suck at this today. Like that's why I'm asking you to do it. And every day you're going to get a little bit better. It's just like mobility. The first day, you're not going to be great at doing a lot of these drills. You're not going to be great at doing a lot of this, mobility work. But over time, it's going to get a lot better. So we're doing a lot of those things. And then also, too, you got CNS adaptations. You got connective tissue adaptations. You got structural differences, right? Which is going into some of those motor preferences stuff, too. I think that the motor preference stuff is a good, like, especially for the market that is like generally unaware of anything to do with the body, and they don't have a lens really to look at the body from an anatomy standpoint and some basic structure. It's just like on base U, like adding structure into the game and like actually looking, not structure into the game, adding human structure like an anatomy like into the game, I think is a positive for people to start understanding the body and the different movement types. The problem is along with that, it's like we've been doing that for a long time. Right. And people just are just now starting to learn. It's like the, what's the effect called? Or the Kruger effect, where like you think you know a lot and your competence and confidence. Or
I don't know the name of the model,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I know all
yes.
this.
So it's like again in the very beginning, it's like the graph goes like this. It's like it's the competence is across the bottom, and then confidence is on the up, the y-axis, I guess you would say. And again, in the very beginning, you start learning something. You went to a seminar. You finally read your first anatomy book. You finally took, whatever, you took one of our courses, all these things, and you're like, boom, I know so much, right? But meanwhile, on the competence scale, you actually don't know very much. You're more confident because you know more than like the average person on that subject, because you actually spent, a couple hours researching it and like understanding that, right? But then really, all of a sudden, then you realize how much you don't know very shortly after that. And then, over time, you start actually building competence, and your confidence will raise, on what you know. But in the very beginning, it's like, I could always tell when people like have gone to a seminar or they finally started getting into the body and they're like, yeah, but this. It's like having an entry level, let's say you're a freshman, like an SEC, not a SEC, at an S&C, like, type program, like you're trying to, learn from that lens, and you go in there and it's like you disagreeing with the instructor, right? It's like, okay, like, bro, you've taken this class for 2 weeks, like this is the first couple chapters you read of the book, you know it from a 100 level, and like this is a general, yes, let's start working in this direction of understanding some of the basics of how the body is put together. Like, this is where my hips are, and this is how the bone. But again, along with it, like there's levels to that, right? And there's also a lot more going on than just that one lens that you're seeing things from. And the longer that you're inside of things, you realize how complex the body actually is. I've used this a couple times, but I think it fits well here, is that understanding, like, a couple years ago when I went to a seminar, again, with again, if I handed you a broken like Swiss watch and I was like, hey, like, has all, the ones that have all the hands and, dials and all the things, it's like, hey, this thing's broken. Like, can you try to fix this? And then you'd be like, no, dude, like, I don't work on watches. Like, I have no idea how I'd fix this thing. Like, go to a watch guy that works on watches. So we look at that and we go like, oh yeah, it's just way too complex. Like, I'm not even going to try to take it apart and put it back together. Right. But the human body is infinitely more complex than that watch, yet everyone thinks they can fix it, right? And so that's where it comes along, because we all have a body, we walk around it all day, we think that everything's great. So like, again, we use that, and then we understand that as like, again, when you have a hammer, because you went to the store, you picked up a hammer, and now you start walking around and you're like, okay, what can I use this hammer on? Like, oh yeah, everything looks like a nail when you have that hammer, right? So when you go to your entry level seminar and you start walking around, you start looking for everything looks like a nail, and you want to hit your hammer and use your new tool to try to fix everything to every problem, and like you realize quickly that it doesn't, right? And then also too, on that same lens, like, for example, when it comes to that, is then you start understanding like, okay, like there is weight in like experience, with things as well, and like working with athletes that have all these different body types and all these different structures and all these different things. So I think, the things with the motor preferences, like, I think it's good. I think that it pushes the game holistically more towards that ground. Again, On Base U, I think, did the same thing. It's like push the game more towards that direction of like understanding those things too as well. I still think that it's missing, a good amount of pieces when it comes. But again, along with it, like that's not the point. Like the whole point is not, you can't look at 100 classes, 200 class. Like you can't look at even all of college. You could be graduated. That's not the end all be all. Like it's the beginning of knowledge, right? And I think the same thing when I look at like motor preference stuff. It's like it's the beginning of where the game should be going, of understanding like deeper levels of structure, of anatomy, and how all these different movement types and all these things happen. I do think it's also too, you got to be mindful if you look at it like a destination and being like, this is the holy grail or this is the other thing, is again, I think even if I ask, Swope that and he's sitting right across from me, he's not gonna be like, oh, bro, this is it. Like, and there's nothing more to learn. And this is like, that's not how he, again, I know like, it's like, that's not gonna be the conversation, right? Is it a great resource? Is it a good thing that we're, again, like entry level for, like, if you have no understanding of the body and all those other things, like, yeah, it's going to point you in a better direction than necessarily just like going by the seat of your pants with no education, like, for sure. But with that being said too, there's a lot of complexities. There's a lot of complexities that are really deep, not only based on the body, because that's its own realm, but then you have the game itself, right? And then all the things like, look, I mean, like we talked about, like, it would be amazing, right, for me to be, 6'5" and be able to dunk and like do all these other things, right? If my body was like, that way. But right, there's a reason why there's very few, even in like the history of the game, even the last, I don't know how long ago basketball you think, but like there's not many players underneath 6 foot, right? Like, now don't get me wrong with that. Has there been some phenomenal ones? Like, absolutely, right? Like, sure, great, right? But there's some constraints of the game that, again, along with it, like genetic factors that are like are big differences. And again, the same thing with it. Like, sumo wrestlers like have a really low likelihood of being a jockey. Like, their bodies are very different. Now, again, also a jockey has a really low likelihood of being a sumo wrestler. Like, okay, great, you have those things. Well, when we start to understand that, like, human structure is really important when it comes as a base of like what I spend my time on, and like what's going to be the biggest bang for my buck at this point. And then you also have at this point in my life, is it better, again, along with it, like you have speed windows and like the athleticism windows when you're younger that you can like really hammer on like doing some of those things as well, which is super important. And then, you got, there's infinite levels of complexity of like, connective tissue. Again, is this a structural issue where it's like, it doesn't matter how much we work on this connective tissue wise, like this is never going to get better just because of how, the hips are, or an injury that they had, or, again, their CNS system, or again, like, how the brain processes information, like, just there's layers on layers on layers on that side for sure.
Yeah. And to go on that, like the genetic side, absolutely. But also too, I think I can't remember who I was having this conversation with, is like me and you, similar height, but way different type of athletes. Like, I bet when you trained, you probably, and people have listened before, like you could lift weight, bilaterally, strong as heck.
Yeah.
Right. Blah, 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 blah. Right. Well, I'm not that way. I was the opposite. Like, I could, do a split stance with the best of them, but you bilaterally throw some weight on a bar and tell me to squat it. Like, for whatever reason, like, at that time, I was like, oh, maybe I'm just not meant to do this. Right. But I start to learn more. It's like you start to understand structure and like genetically how I'm built, but also too, I benefited from working on those bilateral lifts and getting them a little stronger.
Correct.
Once I got to a point, I'm like, bro, I'm single leg RDL in 70s.
Yeah.
And I can't deadlift 300 pounds. That's a problem. Right. And then you're over here deadlifting 500 pounds, but single leg deadlifting 40s.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
I was below that. It was like 20. So yeah.
But again, that's a problem. And so if, like, for example, for me to just think, okay, well, I'm never going to work on that because this is just the type of athlete I am. Like, I saw huge jumps as an athlete, and I see this as a coach too. It's like some of our athletes that aren't as agile, quick, fascially driven, like working that direction benefits them tons. Are they great at it? Do they love it at first?
Just because you're a big heavy set guy that plays first base doesn't mean you shouldn't do athletic stuff.
Yeah, 100%.
Like, it's just like
100%.
Like, well, my body would prefer you literally to just be heavy and move a bunch of weight, and it's like great, but in the game a bit, like you can't be a DH at 12. Like, I mean, I guess you could, but like again, along with it, if you want to go a long ways in the game, like there's some general levels that you need to meet. Now, again, it's like that battle of, okay, what general needs do I like have, like need to be, to like, I got to be able to do the general level of skill, and there's things that I'm going to be insanely good at, right? Like tools, like for example, right? If you look at that, right? Like, okay, there's a general level of skill, and then you have tools that are like plus, right? Like for me, again, for when I played, right, I had like 1+ tools, like my arm, like I had a really good, arm, right? And I could throw. So it was just like having that, like, okay, that's a plus tool compared to the, a lot of other people, like that was a plus tool that I had. But again, along with that, right? It's just like you're saying, is there's a lot of preferences that my body has that are not good for it, right? If I keep going down that route and I just like do whatever makes it happy in the moment, is again, looking at any other area of life, it's not that's not good, right? Again,
Yeah.
biblically, like going with my flesh, right? Like not good, right? Like going with my emotions, getting pushed around, or I'm angry right now, so I'm gonna, I'm gonna yell at you, like all these other things. Like if I just give in to whatever my body wants all the time, it's like, again, my body doesn't want to do a lot of water bag stuff. Like it's really like, and that's funny because everybody would think like, oh yeah, like all the water bag stuff.
Yeah.
It's like my body hates water bag stuff. Like it's super difficult. And also too, I'm gonna also put on there like water bag stuff is super difficult for anybody, but for certain, again, certain body types like and connective tissue types and like, or not types, but more like how you're put together from a connective tissue standpoint, like that makes it really tough to do stuff like that. But again, like that would be major for me. It would have been major for me when I was playing. And also too, it doesn't mean that I don't go and lift. It doesn't mean that we don't do any bilateral stuff. It doesn't mean that we, again, it doesn't mean that we just train, anterior. It doesn't mean that we, never train posterior. It doesn't mean that we always train posterior. Like it's all of those mixes and just like understanding for like certain players, like, hey, what would get you to another level, right? And for this hitter, yeah, maybe they do need to rotate more than other players. It doesn't mean that they should never do a drill with their leg not behind them. It doesn't mean that they should never be on farm boards. It doesn't mean that they should never do a kickback drill or something that, again, is going to cause a deceleration pattern or something like that, too. It's like, yeah, theirs might not look like your decels are not going to look like my decels. But overall, especially when we measure kinematics and we actually look at that, again, it doesn't matter across the board. Like you still need to decelerate. Now, how you decelerate, right, and how you transfer force, right, and how aesthetically it looks is going to look different based on your structure compared to mine. But again, along with that, it doesn't mean that it's not happening, right? So like I posted yesterday where we talked about Harper, for example, right? It's like some people might look at him and go, oh yeah, like he's so rotation, or even like, let's take the extreme of extremes. Let's say we go like Aaron Judge, right? You look at him and you're like, oh, okay, like, they're snapping and tilting the hips and all these other things. Like he is still decelling out of his mind when he hits balls, or decelling really hard. People, again, and you can go with your eyes and go, he's not decelling. It's like, bro, if literally he didn't decel, his bat would never leave his shoulder. Like that, you're not snapping it with your hands. Again, this is all very easy. Like I feel like I'm talking to the whole crowd right now. But my point is again, if we put K-Vest on and we put any type of, again, in their systems, like I've seen his charts, like I've seen his kinematics. Right? It isn't just everything just rotating and like, the barrel's just going out. Like again, like along with it, like every player decels. Now, how hard they decel and the strategies they use to decel are different comparatively, right? But again, everybody that thinks that it's like, oh, I shouldn't do this drill because, again, I'm a sumo wrestler, so there's nothing at all that a jockey does that could ever benefit me. I mean, that's ridiculous. Like, I'm saying? Like, it could be one thing in their diet. It could be, a thought, like how they think about things. It could be any of those things could be beneficial to, you as well. Now, if you went fully that way, could it be a problem? Like, sure. Like for example, if I go fully training, like, and also do all the things and do all the work that you do in X, Y, and Z, I might not even get a quarter of the results that you get. Right? Now, again, that might be a bad strategy for me. Maybe I need to go play left field. And not try to play short. And that's where, again, globally for me is going to be a bigger deal for my performance because now I can put on that weight. Now I can hit balls like that. I can be that strong. I don't have to try to be Mr. Athletic and bounce around and be agile and do all those other things too, right? It depends on all those things. Like we don't need Aaron Judge to play short, right? Like he doesn't need to play short. The catcher doesn't need to play, center field. Like we don't need those things to happen, right? So it's like also understanding that with the movement and their body types. And we've been doing this for years, right? How many coaches, the big kid walks on the field, he's 6'3", 220 pounds. You're not going, you know what? That's going to be my shortstop. Like we already look at that from a basic level of structure of going like, yeah, when me and you walk on the field, generally people are going, especially me at this point, they're probably like, okay, maybe over the third, right? But you, me, like generally, right? When I walked on the field, almost every time, everybody would be like, hey, are you middle infielder? Hey, are you middle infielder? Right? Like, because the structure kind of dictates. If the guy's really tall and he plays baseball, you're like, hey, are you a pitcher? Why? Because again, hey, they're stocky little, like strong, like, hey, are you a catcher? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like there's certain positions, and again, along with that, that dictate a certain type of, body structure already, right?
Yeah.
Because they're more predisposed to being more successful at doing something or another. But again, it doesn't mean that the catcher shouldn't be doing agility stuff.
Right.
It doesn't mean that or for example, like Mookie Betts playing right field, it doesn't mean that he gets zero benefit out of playing shortstop pregame every single day. Yes, some of it could be psychological, but also too, he's getting a lot of agility going side to side, and he's getting again, like he's doing agility work. While in the outfield, he doesn't have to make cuts like that on an everyday basis, and he's not nowhere getting that as many reps, right? But it keeps him really athletic and probably helps him hitting wise, right? Because his ability to get in the ground and stop and decelerate and change direction and all those other things. So like again, it's like having those things together. It's like, understanding that too as well. It's like, okay, just because I'm going to be more successful doing this doesn't mean like, for example, it doesn't mean just because you're an athlete, it doesn't mean that you should do zero bodybuilding things. There's basic like a curl or something like that. That doesn't mean like an athlete just shouldn't do because, bodybuilders do that. Well, yeah, there's overlap. Like, and also too, there's things that, again, there's isometrics that could be huge for you at certain points in your development that are, like great as an athlete. We got to go more than isometrics, but there's a time and a place that we have to do those other things and train that. So I think that that's also, a big piece there is just like having that, keeping that in reference in mind. That's just like, yes, I'm more predisposed and I'm going to be great. Again, if I'm going to double down on my strengths, sure. But it doesn't mean you can just abandon the general skill sets that you need across the board. Or if you just raise that one little area just a little bit more, what that overall could do for your entire performance, could be huge for you too.
Yeah. So with that kind of like brings up like another question, which I kind of know being around you is, in my opinion, I think a thing that allows you to see the things that you see the way that you do is because you challenge yourself to see things through different lenses. So, when I mean different lenses, like an S&C lens, a PT lens, a biomechanical lens, just a basic foundational understanding of, anatomy.
Why don't you break that down though too? Like when you say lens, what does that mean?
So each of those scopes of practice, in my opinion, and then to give my background, like I started off wanting to be a PT. So a lot of my stuff was pre-physical therapy and ended up going the S&C route, strength and conditioning. Or performance, however you want to, classify that, to graduate and seeing the difference in that sense of a lot of the PT stuff, once you get done with, gen eds, is very segment to segment, subanatomical, like, hey, there's this muscle in the quad, there's this muscle in the quad, there's this muscle in the quad, this is the insertion, this is the origin, the two attachment points, of that particular muscle. This is how it can affect your knee, this is how it can affect your hip, and we look at that little area, right? And so when we were in PT, doing stuff in PT, it was very, and then too, we still learn that foundational stuff in S&C, but then when you get to the higher level stuff, the PT was very into, this isn't necessarily everywhere, but my experience is the PT.
I'll say it. There's a lot of bullshit bad PTs. There you go.
There you go. but trying to be a politician over here. But no, like,
let's tell the people,
hey,
there's a lot of bad PTs out there.
Yeah. So like, for example, hey, I hurt my knee. Okay, we're gonna get your quad stronger.
Yeah.
Like that's typically what our PT would do.
Yeah.
Hey, I hurt my knee. Strength conditioning coach is like, okay, let's look at your core. Let's look at your hips. Let's look at your hammies. Let's look at
your low back hurts must be your core.
Yeah. Again, good ones will start to look a little bit more like, okay, globally, if that's what you want to call it. And then too, and I got into more like the higher level biomechanical stuff. Like, hey, it's like, look at a joint below, a joint above, right? If you have problems, like, let's look elsewhere too. Where is this stemming from?
Yeah.
Right. And so like you got those different lenses, and then also too, like, let's not forget the psychological side of all of it.
Yeah.
With that is like, okay, how are you processing stuff? Are you someone that doesn't process pain as well? So if something's slightly uncomfortable, right? Oh, my knee hurts. I probably tore my ACL. Like, okay, well, how you respond to an exercise is going to be different than someone else that, handles pain a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And so like with that, there's that scope as well. And so, which I know you do a lot of looking into all these different scopes.
Yeah.
And so when I talk about that lens is, so for example, when I first started shadowing you, we do like a lot of staggered stuff, right? Is really early on, we do a lot of staggered. We would do a lot of stuff that's like on the farm boards was a really early on. Instantly I'm like, that makes sense to me, right? It's like, okay, they lack stability in their middle,
Mm.
right? Just from a general foundational, I'm taking it back to that standpoint. It's like it can
Yeah.
get way more complex. They lack stability through their pelvis and through their core. Like, we're going to make it unstable.
Yeah.
Teach them how to stabilize it because it's
Correct.
going to benefit them when it comes to,
Yeah.
kinematics and some sequencing and transfer of energy, stuff like that. And so I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, that makes sense. But then I go and I show a friend that's also in the same classes and the PT. They're like, well, he's unstable there. Like, we need to get him off the boards and we need to do some, leg extensions, right? He needs to get stronger in his quads before we even try to do that, right? And so that's where our alignments differed because I started going more like strength route. I'm like, okay, if I lack stability, right? I need to create an unstable environment and learn how to stabilize it.
Well,
Not too
yeah.
far. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong. Like,
I was
I'm
gonna
not
say-
balancing on a Bosu ball, catching, kettlebells over my head. It's like, oh, it's unstable, create stability, but within reason, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Well, and also too, for example, like even when you are adding, let's say you're going like, okay, like, oh, we got to get stable, so we're gonna do, like RDL or something like that, right? It's like, okay, you're still creating instability.
Mhm.
Like, okay, you're adding a weight.
Yeah,
Okay, it's an
weight.
external load
Yep.
that creates instability,
Mhm.
right? Like now, if you want to mix in skill with strength, right, where they're not in their own, like you're teaching the body to be more coordinated while it's also getting strength. That's what I mean by that too. Like we talked about that a little while ago, where I was talking about like I just found more efficient ways of doing it.
Mhm.
It's like, yes, we can do all this. Okay, we talk about this. The only reason I'm in the weight room doing everything I'm doing in the weight room is so I can be better on the field.
Mhm.
It's the only reason, right? So if at the end of the day, if what's happening in the weight room is not happening on the field and it's not transferring very well, which I spent a lot of my life doing,
Mhm.
is that I'm going to find better ways of doing that. And at an entry level view out of it, you might just go, all these guys go like, oh, well, he's just not strong enough. He's just not strong enough. He's not strong enough. He's not strong enough. And it's like, okay, great. I heard that, right? Not only with my case, and I also too had to train so many athletes, all these other things, just like, oh, these, like you said, there's so many guys that have been cleared by the strength coach and says, oh, no, they are stable. How many guys, if we had come in and the PTs go, oh yeah, their hip's good, their knees good, their this is good, their core strength's awesome, the hip flexors aren't tight, or the blah, 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 or whatever it is, right? And then meanwhile, all of a sudden, like, they can't get into a certain position, and it's like, hey, like, you keep thinking about, like, it's like, oh, like, let's say it was like the hip flexor example. It's like, oh, his hip flexor, like, isn't tight. And I was like, yeah. Passively.
Mhm.
Actively, his brain is firing that hip flexor like crazy, and it's overactive, right? Like it's overactive when he goes to do anything powerful because, again, his adductor is, it's even weaker, right? Like the whole, like the hamstring is having some major issues on that front side, or like he lacks this is that. Like there's all of these other things that you can get into like deeper from that lens. And then also you got the global, like you could go a million different directions, right? Depends on the athlete. But my point is like, having with that is going like, okay, like the whole point is to get that to transfer. That's why water bags are so big. That's why, again, like we go so heavy down those routes. That's why also too, when we do things in the weight room with like VersaPulleys and all these things, it's like the body was not built to just play baseball. It has a lot of options. You can train it in a plethora of ways, right? And also too, along with it, right? Like there's a lot of things you can do in the weight room that would make your player worse. By far. People think they can just throw them in the weight room, the guy's immediately going to get better. And that's because at a lower level, when the guy hasn't been working out at all, some general strength is going to help anybody, right? But you keep going down those routes and you do that enough and you go so far down it where you become like, again, like you become like me where I'm trying to be a champion in the weight room. Like, great, bro. Like, are you on the strength team or are you on the baseball team? Like, what are you on? Like, what are you really trying to do? Because you spend more time trying to be the strongest guy in the room than you are. I thought your job was the hit. I thought your job was the sprint. I thought your job was to, again, play badminton, whatever, right? Like, I thought that's what you were getting paid to do and that's what your goal was, not to be your goal all of a sudden became the weight room. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, oh, like now I want to be the guy that can deadlift 500 pounds. And it's like, for what? Like, and that's where that was me. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's just like, I had to have that conversation along with it. It's like, so what? Like, you can lift 500 pounds. You also do great charts because that's what you're doing. Like, you're sitting on the bench doing charts because your body can't move. It can't rotate. The movement quality is dog shit. Right. So it's like, you look at that and it's like, again, it's nothing against like lifting weights heavy, but it's like, for me, there's buckets, right? And we have all these buckets that, you have in like of your career. Like, let's say you have all these different buckets of like what, building you as like this athlete, right? Like we talked about, you have the psychological side, right? Like you also have your strength side. You also got, you can call it a power bucket. You could also call it, a coordination bucket. You could also talk it like baseball IQ, like skill set within all these things, like how good of an infielder you are or whatever, right? Like agility, like there's all these different buckets that you can go in. And it's like, dude, like the guy can like you get a guy like me, right? Or we have athletes where it's like, I literally the other day sent somebody an award because I was telling her I was like you won, you're the strongest girl probably on the West Coast that plays this sport, like you won. You don't need to add 10 pounds to your max. We're good. Also, too, you trying to be that strong and why those lifts that you're so strong in, while they're so strong, is also why you move like crap in the box. And the more you do that over and over again, you're going to have more and more of those issues. And then again, you tie that back into the movement preference stuff. And it's like, yeah, like, guess what? When I was deadlifting, I literally felt this again the other day. I was thinking about this. I was going to tell you about this. I was deadlifting the other day, and I just started thinking about how much I don't control the weight eccentrically on the way down. Right?
Making noise.
Yeah.
So, what is that at Planet Fitness? The lunk
Yeah, the
alarm?
lunk alarm, man.
Yeah, take it back to your guys'
Don't be
ropes.
banging no weights around here, man. But again, that's like a big thing, right? It's like, for example, like I'm deadlifting, concentrically pulling this weight up, pressing my legs into the ground, back pulling, all the stuff, right? By the way, my back was sore the next day, so just to like give you a heads up. So then, again, you do all those things, and it's like, yeah, but again, like, what am I training my body to do? Concentrically fire like this, right? Where it's like, and then I'm also training that fascial sling, like everything is connected. That's why you need to know fascia, right? From head to toe, everything's connected. I'm targeting that fascial line through my back, right? That run through all my erectors, through my, my back, that all the things that make me stand up as I rotate, push out of my back leg. This is how I create power. That's also too, my biggest and strongest lift is my deadlifts, right? And then also on top of that, my second strongest lift code, right? My lat pull downs. My lat pull downs are strong as hell, right? It's like I can pull a lot of weight doing that, especially for like my size. It's like, okay, great, I can do that. But and then again, the next one, my next strongest lift, my rows. I was like, okay, I can pull a lot of weight within my rows. It's like, great. My posterior side is strong as all hell, right? The problem is again, it pulls me out of positions when I rotate. It also, and again, it's not that you don't need your back to be strong. It's not that you don't need your legs to be strong. It's just like asymmetry wise. Like everybody has asymmetries, but I have some massive asymmetries, not only from a CNS perspective, not only from a coordinator's perspective, not only from a powers perspective, right? All of that together, and then structurally too, like how much mass I have on one side of my body compared to other when it comes to muscle, right? It's like I'm very strong on the backside of my body, and if you guys don't remember, because I'll remind everybody, everybody was talking about, well, literally this was the thing back when when I was growing up, this was the thing. They would say like, stand against the wall. Okay, everything touching the wall is what you need for baseball. Okay, well, that's ridiculous because I need my entire body. So that's wrong. Okay?
So you're old. I never did that one.
Yeah. And then also too, no, this was also coming from pro coaches. So I'm gonna tell you,
Classic.
We're in the whole mix.
Classic.
And also too, strength guys inside pro ball.
Wonderful.
At the time. So just to give you a heads up, right? The interior side just didn't matter, I guess. And so, which is funny because, I'd probably argue more the opposite way, right? And so, okay, so then you go, okay, movement preference stuff. Let's say when you go into that movement preference and you go in, literally if you go binary, if you go like aerial and terrestrial guys like interior stuff, right? They're more prone to interior stuff. And aerial, they really like posterior stuff, right? So it helps them rotate, all these excellent things. They want to do these things. Okay, well, great. But here's the problem. Let's say I give into that. It sounds good from a base standpoint. Like, okay, well, they really like posterior. They want to use a lot of these muscles to rotate. They want to do X, Y, and Z. So let's double down on that. Let's get that really strong. Okay, well, I did that, right? Not only did I do that, like I did that, and I'm more of a terrestrial mover. And again, remember, it's a spectrum. People like to make it binary, and that's where, again, if you don't understand or you took your one seminar and you think it's one or another, we're on a spectrum. Some of us are crazy this way, some of us are crazy that way. Guess what? Also on top of all of those things, and again, we can, you sit in all those things where we're talking with some of the best S&C guys in the world, some of the best biomechanists in the world, some of those other things where we sit down and talk about it. Like there is a lot different, in all of those. Not only is there a spectrum of like where you would classify, because you got to remember too, like science is us trying to understand nature. Nature is already happening, right? Like, again, like I said the other day, like nature doesn't go like, let me consult with my geologist before I make this. No, like we're trying to understand what God already put into play, right? Like your body is already happening. It's functioning every day. We're trying to understand it, right? And we're trying to better understand it, and then we're applying like science. Well, we think this is my theory. Let me go test it. Does it work? Does it not work? Oh, it didn't happen in this one scenario. Okay, well, maybe that was a fluke. Boom, it happens again. Okay, well, that doesn't hold up. That theory doesn't hold up because now we're seeing this happening over and over again. Science is not a declaration of truth, right? It's a theory that is what we're going with until something proves it wrong, right? And then we update that belief system, right? And so people like to go, it's science, it's physics, until it's wrong. That's how literally like, quantum physics came into existence, was because physics didn't explain, right, to that capacity. There's a whole bunch of things where you try to figure it out with physics and it'd be wrong. And like quantum physics comes in and goes, oh, this is where the physics are wrong, because again, you're trying to apply the wrong concepts in the wrong situations that again, like a whole nother rabbit hole, right? But I think the biggest parts of understanding there as well is, right, is like also because like let's say it's Muay Thai, for example. Okay, if you want to go do Muay Thai, your anterior side better be strong as hell. Like it's a requirement of the movements of the sport. Like you have to be strong on your anterior side. Like that's why all of them are so, like we talked about, why they're all rounded in, why they're again like movement play. Like why are also so many baseball players all rounded in? Because anterior strength is a very important thing. But then what did we do? We saw everybody rounded in. Oh, don't bench. Oh, stop training your front side. You're already so rounded in, because everybody's looking at it from a S&C and a PT side and go, we want to get you back open, back up. So let's do all these things posteriorly. And then we enlarge the front side of the body. And again, not so much anymore. But, I remember Cressy coming out and like hammering about anterior strength at one point, and I'm like, yes, like, but just having that perspective of understanding that, again, like a lot of times, and this is what, people didn't understand at the time, right? Like, let's say your shoulders are rounded in, right? And you're going like, oh, I want to do all these things on the backside. Well, also too, that connective tissue is getting really tight and all those other things because you're so weak on your front side. So you need to be strengthening while you're lengthening. And that's a whole, like there's all these things we can get into, right?
Don't get too deep now.
Yeah. So on a surface level, it sounded good to go, oh, we're tight here.
Right.
Well, let's release this normal PT. Let's scrape. Let's do needles. Let's do all this other thing. Let's, do all these mobility exercises. But then we're going to really strengthen the backside of the shoulder. And we're going to really strengthen the back. And that's the thought process going on. And again, it's not all wrong, right? There's pieces in that's true. But again, along with that, you go too far down that route, then all of a sudden we're never doing anything on the front side of our body because everything wants to rotate inward, right? Like everything's starting to come this way, right? So especially like throwers and, obviously that stuff. So I think that it's a bigger piece of like understanding that is like as well, is having that connection and keeping that aligned of just being like, all right, look, again, how I train is really important. Also, yes, knowing the structure and the movement, the body types and the things that we have. Like, yes, we've been keeping those things in mind since the beginning of time, just in our own ways, and now it's more scientific. But also, too, there's much more layers deeper in understanding things on a spectrum, right? And then also, too, understanding everything that's at play. You also, again, like we talked about, like even in motor preference, they look at this as like, not only just like dominant eye, but also too, like, I think they call it like motor eye, right? Where it's like, when you're doing certain activities, like what eye you use dominantly to like perceive and like, like it processes information quicker, like X, Y, and Z. All these things that goes into there. And again, like they go and check their stuff out, right? Of doing that, right? But you have all of that. And then you also have on the other side of that too, of just being like, okay, again, if you just let my body do what it wants and feels like doing all the time, well, typically your body literally is designed to be as efficient as possible and do as little as possible.
Mm-hmm.
It wants to spend as little energy as possible because it's trying to survive, right? And it's not worried about you being overweight.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't care, like in that way, right? Like it doesn't care. Like it's trying to keep you surviving. You can be 10 pounds overweight, 20 pounds overweight, and you're going to live. Like we're good. You get what I'm saying? Like it's okay. The body is more concerned with you not having food. Like you know, again, like going from like all of these things from the past, it's trying to do everything as efficient as possible. Like, yo, just sit here and chill.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then we have to fight that on the opposite end of that, right? Of, hey, like, again, I don't want to do water bag stuff, but it's like, it's really good for my body to do
Mhm.
water bag stuff. Like, I don't want to do like hard workouts, you know, a lot of the times, but like, that's good. And also too, taking that side up, one more step I'll take there too as well, is I got to the other side of that where I just started doing stuff because it sucked. Also too, sometimes your body doesn't want to do stuff because it shouldn't be doing it.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah, right.
I also don't want to do heroin. So,
Yeah.
you know, there's that. You get what I'm saying? But my point is like on the other side of that is just like keeping that in mind as well, is that a lot of times like the things that we don't want to do are the things that we should be doing. And then also too, like as well, when you get onto the other side, is just because it's hard doesn't mean, you know, because you can trick your brain on the other side of that as just being like, well, I have to work out and I have to do these things. And it's like, don't work so hard. Like there's nothing worse than working hard against yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You're working really hard. You're making all these sacrifices. You're doing all this extra work and it's making you worse.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's nothing worse. Like that's,
Yeah, and then that's where the other lenses come into play, though, is again, you start to understand, like, okay, yeah, I suck at it, or I don't want to do it. It sucks. But understanding different lenses, too, it's like from a PT lens and understanding that lens is like, okay, maybe there actually is a problem here, and I'm going to hurt myself if I keep doing this rather than just being like, oh, it sucks. I'm going to try to overcome, you know, psychologically, I'm going to get over it. I'm going to get over it. I just got to work through something hard. It's like, there's some truth to that. There's also some truth to like, yeah, like there's some serious problems here. Like we should probably isolate this thing and like get it stronger,
Yeah.
you know, in an isolated way rather than just trying to push through it globally. Right. And then also too, like going back to that is like doubling down. Like we've had conversations with some really good biomechanists, some really good strength coaches, some really good skill coaches that again, maybe they don't know anatomy or they don't know biomechanics. They don't know strength, but they've also got hitters to hit.
Mhm.
Right. And so too, but with that, a blend of all of them is super, super important. Like I said, to start to see things the way that we were just talking about it is like understanding what's too much, what's not enough, you know, how much to push, when to push.
Mm.
And then again, too, are we perfect all the time? No, but starting to better understand and try to better understand that on a daily basis and practice that, understanding those different lenses too. Like again, like you could, said this before, and like we go in, it's like you could go grab that biomechanist, look at all the data, and be like, that's pretty good. But if you put him in that cage with you and tell him to teach a hitter how to hit, could he teach him how to hit?
Mhm.
Maybe,
Yeah.
but also maybe not, right? And same thing with the strength coach. Maybe not, right? Same thing with the skill coach. Maybe.
Cody's
not.
too nice. 99% no.
Yeah,
They would
most
be dog-
likely not.
They'd be dog shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Right.
I've seen it in action.
Yeah, and so like with that too is understanding all of those different sciences, and not when I say understanding, trying to better understand them on a daily basis. We'll probably never completely understand it until we go meet the man upstairs, and then he'll tell us, and we'll be like,
Mm.
"Whoa!" It's like never would have thought of that,
Mhm.
you know. But again, you know, trying to better understand all of those sciences on a daily basis and understand like when to practice them, and you know who needs what, when,
Well,
you know,
you're-
what connects with them.
I see it kind of coming more like, I see it kind of like you becoming more aware and having a higher wisdom of like nature, right? And what I mean by that is like in nature, we break it into all the sciences, right? All these different lenses.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, nature doesn't know sciences and it doesn't know all of these different, you know, all these different
We
sci-
break it
doesn't
down for
know-
our
you know,
understanding.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
right? So I feel like what I'm trying to do is understand nature
Mm.
globally, right? Just doing that with the body and looking at its own ecosystem, right? You have all these different systems that are in play, and there's guys that are specialists in this and specialists in that, and we need all those specialists. Like, you know what I'm saying? We need someone to run really hard down that route with the CNS system and because there's plenty of things CNS wise that we still don't understand.
Yeah.
Like we literally have electricity running through our body that's cueing all the things that are happening in your brain and all the things like that muscle and like why your foot's moving and all like all of that is happening literally through like basically wires that are running through your body, right? That have that's sending electricity that is firing, and it's all coordinated, by this tissue that you have in your brain. It's like God's crazy, okay? Like with all these things that he's like
kind of thugging.
yeah. So the thing, like we still can't create, a fraction of, not even I can't even explain how much little we can create that God created, right? But the other point of that is just like looking at it and going, okay, look, if you look at it from the nature standpoint, it's like then you look at it from a higher perspective. And when you look at it from a higher perspective and you don't get stuck in one of those lenses where you're only seeing it and you have tunnel vision inside of like looking at it from like a skill acquisition side, or, like, okay, what are ways that we can teach him to do this? Okay, well, you know what you're missing? He structurally can't do that. Physically can't do that. Okay, great. Oh, well, we're going to do this movement and we're going to do this and we have this whole day planned out. Well, you know what you're missing? Well, they just broke up with their boyfriend today. Their dad just died. They're just like, you're missing. You're not being a great coach because of that, right? You know what you're also just missing? He hasn't had a day off in 2 months. Like, you know what you're also missing, right? Like, you got to take all those things. Like, if you look at that, right? What is a manager's job on a team? To be the global perspective guy, right? You got your hitting coach. You got your assistant hitting coaches. You got your pitching coaches. You got your strength coaches. You got all these other things. You got all your players, right? You got to pick who goes in the game at what time and why, and look at all these other things and make decisions based on the whole thing, right? And that's what I'm thinking is like the same thing as when you look at that is like, I'm trying to see things from a higher perspective, right? And I'm always trying to remove myself and go from a higher perspective. The lenses are great. And there's a moment where you can even sit down and go, okay, well, and you can call on the specialist, or you can call on that lens, the biomechanist, but like, hey, like, what do you see? Hey, man, what do you see? Hey, man, what do you see? But also at the same time, you got to they're all right and they're all wrong, right? All the lenses are right and all the lenses are wrong. And you got to take that information and put the best pieces and understand what you have to do and when, right? And that's where the experience comes from. And that's the difference also too, where I would say knowledge and wisdom, right? It's like, all of these things. And it's not that you're wrong about your analysis. You're wrong about doing it right now. You're wrong that, again, like on the like, if you try to do this right now, or again, like where they're at psychologically, or also too physiologically, right? Like how tired they are, or skill acquisition wise, is like, again, you don't understand the structure of it. It's like, you're right that they need to do this movement, and this is a way that you could get somebody to do this and have some results, but this guy's not gonna be able to do that because structurally or physically they don't have the ability to do that for one reason or another, right? They maybe had an injury, they have a connective tissue issue, they literally have the physical structure of their body, their bones, like literally are how a femur sits inside of the head of the socket is going to be different. Like all of these things are, the angulation of those, right? Like your ISA angles, like what they've been doing their whole life, also too, like CNS system wise, right? Are they a guy that's like really tense and like that's how they play and like that's how they create stability, right? There's all these things where they've developed a lot of those patterns their whole life. It's like changing a lot of those things is going to be tough, right? So it's like having that understanding of, there's a time and a place where instead of trying to change all that, I just open their back foot a little bit, close their back foot a little bit, right? There's times where we tell guys to get more separation and times where we tell people to get less separation. There's times where we do a lot stuff that are very rhythmic and athletic, and there's a lot of things that are very stagnant, right? There's times where we're doing a bunch of staggered stance stuff, and there's times where we're doing a bunch of, 2 legs on the ground, really wide, strong base, nothing but stability down below. Don't even rotate your lower half, and we're cueing that. And then we're telling other guys like, hey, feel like you're hitting this ball with your back hip. Like it's just like there's all that in between. There's guys we're doing 2-hand finishes with. There's players that have 1-hand finish. There's guys that have hands above their head. Then when they start, there's guys that start with their hands at their hip. There's guys that are, like, again, we do all the different things. Now, is there going to be modalities that work between all of them that, like, for example, like there's some staples, right, that we can do with a lot of athletes that can be really beneficial, right? And so, like, I think the same side of that, like, training players reciprocally, I don't care what movement type they are, and like building crossbody strength and all those other things. It's like, I think it's going to be beneficial for anybody across the board. Again, if we're doing, single leg, toss a med ball, it's like, if we're doing it in the weight room, nobody would say shit. But then all of a sudden, we're in the cage and all of a sudden everybody's like, yeah, but this guy's movement type and he can't do that and you're teaching him to be, he doesn't need any crossbody strength and blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, bro. Like, it's just like, you go down all those other routes. It's just like, not understanding like with it is like, you're looking at it through a lens
Mm-hmm.
that you're only seeing what you want the swing in your head to look like,
Yeah.
and not understanding all the anatomy, connective tissue, all the other things that might be happening that are going to lead them to that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just like with that, and I know you've said this before, you're looking at it from a visual standpoint. This is what it looks like, and then you get all angry or butthurt about it because it doesn't look the way that you think that it should look based on this picture in your head.
Yeah.
But you're not understanding the other sciences that are at play here. Like,
Correct.
okay, what are the forces being created?
Right.
Right. We're blending like a skill acquisition while we're also trying to, get stronger cross body and make the tissue adapt. Right.
Yeah.
And it was funny because I sent this to you I went and watched the Padres and Cardinals play, and I was like watching all of them warm up. I'm like, bro, all of them are like anteriorly tilted. All of them. It's crazy. But also on the flip side, I'd be naive to think that none of them are working on trying to get their hips back underneath them a little bit, or maybe a cue there, maybe a cue for them is to try to tuck their hips underneath
Yeah.
them, but they're just so anteriorly tilted that cues what they need to feel. But then too, understanding like just because that's the way it looks doesn't mean that's what they're trying to do. A lot of
Right.
times they're actually trying to do
The opposite.
probably opposite,
Yeah.
the complete opposite of what
Yeah.
they're actually doing, which is a good cue for them to kind of meet in the middle, if that's what you
Yeah,
want to call it.
literally a perfect example that I wanted to add some depth to that is like for example, let's say you take I'm spacing on his name right now. What's his name that was on the Dodgers, went to the Cubs, and the lefty
Bellinger.
right? So you take Belly, right? If you take Belly, like his hips are really tilted like that,
Mhm.
right? But the other thing is that when he stands in the box, especially over the years, like he'll lean his hips forward
Mhm.
into like extreme extension, right? And he'll kind of lean backwards, like Cano used to do that too.
Mm-hmm.
And then as they go to swing, they
Right.
fall back into a hinge as they go into their landing,
Mhm.
and that really helps them as well, right? And like, so you could look at those things and go, man, he's really trying to do this, or it could be the opposite of what he's really trying to do. Or again, you would have no idea. There's a lot of, like, we do this with hitters all the time, is like I'll have them doing a drill, or they have a feel, or they like literally tuck their hips underneath them, and they feel like they're fighting really hard to stay in those positions, or X, Y, and Z. But then you look at video and they're like, yeah, I would have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're watching that film, you would have no clue.
Mhm.
Like what they're actually trying to do and what they're actually trying to focus on. That's why when people like fall in love with video, it's like that's why video isn't the end all be all.
Mm-hmm.
Because yes, it's good because you're trying to create similar shapes or things, that they're doing too. But again, structures are different. Connective tissue is different. How much force they're
Mhm.
actually creating and putting into the ground, putting into the bat, all those other things, like the kinematics matter. It's not just aesthetics,
Mm-hmm.
right? Aesthetics also too is data, right? It's understanding like the shapes that are being created. Like, yes, you can learn a lot from that too, but like how it's being created and what's going on like underneath the body. Because if you just watch it and then you try to create it, that's why a lot of times too people look and they go, "See, look, like they're the same," and it's like, no, they're not. Like, I'm sorry. I'll say this for the 50th time. I'm sorry, bro. You and freaking Barry Bonds are not the same mover, bro.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you don't create the same force. You don't have the same connective tissue. You don't have the same sequencing. You don't have the same CNS patterns.
Yeah.
You don't have the same height, weight, structure, any of those other things. Great, you did one thing that's similarly, somewhat like you matched an angle at a certain point in the swing. Guess what? We can all do that,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's holistically looking at the whole thing, and also too, you could have the exact same mechanics,
Mm-hmm.
right? Movements as Bonds. Great. Could that benefit you? Yes. Also, too, bro, you're 120 pounds, 5'2". Like,
Yeah.
great, right? It doesn't matter,
Mhm.
right? Like, you're not going to be able to produce as much force as him, and those are pop-ups to you,
Mm-hmm.
where you need to have a coach say, "Hey, dude, hit line drives,
Yeah.
stay out of the air, quote unquote, air quotes here,
Mm.
right? And hit a one hopper through the infield and stay in that lower launch angle range, right? And you're going to have a lot more success,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's where it comes into as well as the other side of that, which is like game strategy. It's a whole nother bucket, right? It's the baseball IQ side, but it's like game strategy of being like, for how I'm moving, from how my body's put together, from where I'm currently at right now, what is the best strategy to get me the best results right now to put me on a path towards my goal?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I do. Great. If I did this other thing, I would hit 500, but I'm just slapping singles and I'm fast.
Mm.
And my goal is not to play at this, LSU or something like that. It's like, yeah, we're probably gonna have to change that. Even though your average is probably gonna come down a little bit, but your power numbers we can
Mhm.
jump up dramatically because you're not just slapping ground balls and hoping the defense,
Mhm.
bobbles the ball and you beat it out to first base because you run a,
Mm-hmm.
freaking 6'3", right?
Yeah.
Like, great. You know, it's all of those things of understanding like that as well, of like, okay, what is my approach to training? And like the fact that there is so much to talk about and there's so many different avenues that you go, like, I kind of think of it like it's like you got to go through like fire, like you got to go you got to go through these things. It's like what makes it so difficult, in that there isn't a book. Like I told some this other day, right? It's like someone doesn't come with a manual, right? And they're like, if you just do this, and this, you're going to be an amazing player, right? Like the journey and your individual journey, like that is the reward. That is the fun part. That's what makes it so fun when you are 4 for 4 today with 3 jacks or whatever, right? Or I never did that, by the way. But like, like you when you have those type of experiences, that's what makes them so rewarding, because it is so damn difficult to be good.
Yeah.
Right. And it's even insanely difficult to be great.
Yeah.
Right. It's just again, a lot of it, especially too, when there's things that are stacked against you, so many things, and so many of those buckets have to go your way, and so many life events and all these things like have to go your way. Right. That it's just,
yeah. And
greatness is greatness for a reason.
Yeah. And like you were saying, okay, so one of the biggest things I see all the little guys do it is they love to look at big leaguers, and they love to try to mimic Mookie's swing, Trout's swing.
Yeah.
My favorite one was we had a righty that loves Ohtani. It was like, I'm trying to mimic Ohtani's swing. I'm like, first of all, like you're hitting on a different side of the plate. The angles are completely different. 2, also, like you just don't create type of force he does. Like that dude's a superhuman. Like he's a beast.
He's also not a little guy.
Yeah, he's very,
Like,
very large. Like he's
not a
tall
little guy.
and he's strong as heck, right? It's like, I don't know if y'all seen his biceps, but my man cooking, right? It's like, and you look at it, it's like, you got to be careful too with some of that. It's like, you give them these visuals of these big leaguers, like, oh, just do it like that. Just do it like that. Like, one, they're not trying to do that in some instances, or even a lot of them. Also, too, on top of all that, like, you're just not creating that type of force. Like, you could try to hit like Mike Trout. That's great.
Yeah.
But there's just stuff that you don't do that he does, that if you tried to mimic his swing, you don't create that force. So good luck. Like you can try to swing like that, and you're just going to keep hitting grounders to the pitcher or to the shortstop. Like you just don't create that force. You can't get to the same positions he gets to, etc. That doesn't mean don't train your body to be more like that in a sense sometimes, right?
For sure.
Or try to mimic a part of his swing. Like, maybe his hand
It's
setup.
not going to be identical.
Yeah.
And
right?
if you're trying to be identical, again, along with it, it's like, great. Again, it doesn't mean you're going to have the results that he has, right? Like, again, and even those guys, like a lot of times, again, guys are trying to mimic movements that they're trying not to do, right?
100%.
Or when they're bad, right? Or again, along with that, you have no idea what he's thinking. You don't know ideas of stacks of thoughts, right? This thought led to this, that led to this, that led to this. And then now I can feel all 5 of those.
Now it all makes sense.
Yeah, because all of a sudden now it's, in skill acquisition, they call it chunking, right? In skill acquisition, they call it chunking. And so you chunk information together, and it becomes, that's why like experts have a hard time explaining how they got to where they got, because their brain auto processes all of those things, because they chunk all that information together. And then instead of your brain having to go thought to thought to thought to thought, it goes from like A to Z, like really fast. But then when you're trying to explain yourself, then you have to go A, B, C, D, and like walk all the way through. But that's why we know that, right? So it's like, so that's the other thing as well, right? It's like they can also process information quicker. Or, for example, I could also give you something to do, right? A drill or whatever. And when you do it, your power numbers are lower, your bat speeds are lower, your, all the things like their ground forces are lower, right? So you look at that drill and today you would say, oh, well, that's worse for you. You just got worse. Well, okay, we'll come back and check in 4 months. I know that I was slower when I moved that way, but then I coordinated it. Then my brain figured it out. Like when I teach you a new way of doing math and a different strategy of getting to this answer, in the beginning it's going to be slower, right? But at some point it's going to be second nature. You're just going to boom, and then that's your new way of doing it, and now you're fast, right? Like, so that's another thing as well. It's like, well, I move faster when I do this. Great. But the problem is, again, you're only seeing it from one lens. How fast can I move today? How much power could I produce today? Right? Like you were talking about in the beginning, like we have a game today. And then also too, sometimes I need to move slower and you'll have better results today. right? Like if you were more stable, if your bat path was way better because you weren't spinning out of your ass trying to create as much bat speed as you could, again, you actually might be able to get a couple hits today, dude, rather than top spinning 4 balls to the shortstop and going, oh yeah, but my exit velocity PR today, man. It's like, bro, you're 0 for 4.
Yeah.
Great. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And again, also too, you might be a guy like that, right? It's like, yo, again, go back and check the guy in 4 months. At the end of the day, if that, if you training that way, it brought you to these other results and that worked for you and that's what you bought into and then great, like good for you, bro. You know what I'm saying? But again, it doesn't mean that it's going to work for everybody. And also too, there could be actually 4 other things that are actually the reason that you got better. But again, that's why Science Week, we try to eliminate variables, right? It could have also been that you just gained 40 pounds in the last, 2 months and, whatever. And you went through a growth spurt and you did all these other things. And it's like, you get, and you got more athletic and whatever, you're on steroids, who knows, whatever.
Yeah.
It's just, there's so many things that could go into like what.
Yeah, no. And I think too, like that pretty much sums up like we have experiences in here and it's just, all of these kids now that come in here, like they're just so inquisitive, like they have social media, they see all this information. And so it's always good to have these conversations. And then, there's always conversations that come up, that I have out there, like, we have and stuff that, I just think is good for everybody to hear us talk about. And that's just one of them that you hear a lot of is like all these kids are being, so categorized and grouped anymore, which I understand too. It's like easier organizationally for a team to be like, oh, you're a power guy, you're a speed guy, you're a power guy in the weight room, you're a strength guy, this is what your program's going to be. This is your hitting group. This is we're going to classify you. And then they come in and like they ask questions, they're inquisitive, right? And so then they come in, they ask like, hey, my coach told me, I need to do this more because blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, yeah, like we know you did this. Like we've been talking about, like you like to do this and you did this when you came in. That's why you're asking for help because you did do this more and you were struggling. But as we've got away from this, not completely, but less and less, and you're not pushing as hard. You're not spinning as hard, whatever it is, right? Your performance has gone up, right? It's like you came in because you were spinning harder 6 months ago, And so we just have these conversations.
Literally, like you said too, like that happens so much where like people will go like, okay, so the let's say it's a new coach, you just got on a new team, right? And you show up and the kid's pushing, right? Like they see the lower half pushing and then they see him doing like, kickback drill or he's on the farm board or whatever. And then they immediately go, oh, well, that's why he's pushing. Meanwhile, they don't have the data from you where you're going like, actually, this is what he looked like 4 months ago. Right? Like he's way better now. And we actually started doing those drills because they help him not push. They help him not do those things. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up too as well is like, for example, like when we go too far with, again, some of the motor preference stuff, or we go those other ways, or some people just don't understand it enough where they're like, oh, well, like, oh, he has a problem staying in the ground. Oh, well, he must be an aerial mover because they have problems staying in the ground. 98% of my athletes have problems staying in the ground.
Like all of them, yeah.
Yeah, like they're very rarely that guy like really holds the ground very well and stays in there as he rotates, right? And again, usually it's the younger athletes that can actually stay in the ground a lot better. And again, a lot of that has to do with mobility and also to better technique because they just haven't been coached poorly yet. And then they also haven't coached themselves poorly yet. They haven't been like, oh, I want to hit a home run. Let me swing as hard as I can and lay kick to my ear and spin with my back. Like, great, right? And yank my shoulders off the ball and all those other things. All of our hitters, like even in golf, like one of the hardest things is them staying in the ground because another thing is like it's hard to create ground force when you're not in the ground. Right? So the earlier you come out the ground, all those things. Now, again, along with that, there also is a big difference where people miss this as well. Just because the foot is in the ground for a short period of time doesn't mean it didn't create a lot of force while it was in the ground.
Right.
You don't need to stay in the ground the whole time to create a lot of, like they can get a lot of power in one, like it's called impulse, right? Like how much force can I create and into the ground, right? Or transfer force in a very short period of time, right? So it's like, you also have that as well, where you have guys that it's like, again, they might have a bent front leg or they might have a straight front leg. Like for example, everybody, I talk about this all the time with like, Rizzo, right? It's like Rizzo hits with a bent front leg and stays in flexion the whole time, right? So they thought that he didn't create a lot of force with his front leg. He creates a massive amount of force with his front leg. And again, that's actually, that helps him stay in the ground when he rotates, right? So like you have those things as well. And then, but I think about that as well. It's like when you look at that and go, it's like, oh, well, if you just start classifying those, and again, you don't actually perform assessments on people and you just start going like, and what I mean by assessments, like you don't need to do these, like, let me check all these joints and like all these things. And again, look, to each their own. Do your own thing. Have your own system. Because this is the other thing I think about is like, let's say you go to like the football. Let's say you go to the football standpoint. Every offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, like they have a system, right? They have a system that they're into, and then that's why when like a player leaves, they're like, oh, well, that system that they were in at on the Patriots, right, was more fit for that type of player, right? Well, this is the other thing too. It's like certain systems are better than other systems, right? And yeah, along with it, like maybe you don't fit that system very well, but also too, that system wins, right? So yeah, you better be a guy that can, again, like again, don't know football deep enough. I need to tap on Jarrell, like phone a friend. But like my thing of like, maybe again, like because your inability to like check off safeties or whatever the hell like your issue is, right? That like you can't quarterback from the pocket, right? You're a guy that likes to scramble. And this system is not built for that. Well, you're not going to do great over here, but you might do great in this other offense, on the other side for another team. But also, too, there's certain systems like overall, right, with the, when you put these types of players together and you put the X, Y, and Z, that you're going to be really successful. And then just understanding like where the game is. Like, guess what? Like, again, like we are in a situation where the defense plays a certain way, or like before there were shifts, and now there is, there's still basically shifts now. Everybody says no shifts. The guy's standing 1 foot to the right. It's just like, so like you have you do all these things, or like the pitcher, the guy's throwing 98 with a slider, or this guy, for example, this lefty in this matchup in X, Y, and Z, like that philosophy is going to work really well against these type of opponents, right? But it's going to work really bad against these other type of opponents, right? So then understanding like those systems as a whole, and then everybody has their own approach as a coach, and everybody wants to sit here and argue, oh, well, this is better than this and this. But again, like I think the other big thing is like, I try to remind myself all the time is like not taking that stuff personal too, of like from the lens of, when I say not personalizing it, is like that in sports, we love to argue about sports and philosophy and what we think and all these things. Because guess what? There isn't any real answer other than results, what's working right now based on, again, like truism will be shown in its results, right? It's like having that same thing is like understanding like that as well as just being like, look, like everybody has an approach, everybody has a system, everybody has a coaching philosophy. We're always upgrading that. We're always upgrading the software. We're always upgrading those other things. The longer you get stuck in one system and one software, and then also too, how many people think that they know the Patriots system?
Yeah.
You're not going in there and running it like Belichick. You're like, you know what I'm saying? Like, how many people think they know the Chiefs system, right? And it's just like, okay, you're not going to go in there and like, be freaking Mahomes, right? It's just like, you got to understand, you got to understand, like, that again, along with it, like also too, a lot of systems work because of who's running it. Yeah. Right. And like, that's where I think is also a big piece too, as well, is like people want to take, let's say someone tries to take like what we do or all these other things and they try to go and do it. It's like, yeah. But also a large way of like how we train players, the reason it works is because we're running the system. Like that's why it works. Yeah. It wouldn't work for a billion other people because you don't have our lenses. You don't have our experience. You don't see the body, all the things that we do and the intricacies and the details and all the stuff. Right. Just like someone thinks like, yeah, but I've been a Patriots fan, my whole life. And I studied blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, bro. Again, there's a reason the team isn't paying you to be, to coach the team. Right. Like at the end of the day, pieces of it. You think this or that or whatever. But like on the end of the day, like the reason it works and the reason the people get the results that they do is because of all that information. And then,
well, I mean, different. I know a little off topic a little bit from that sense, but just going in that, it's like, that was the case. Think about the coaches, if you even follow football, like the guy down in Miami, the Dolphins guy, like he went down there and he started bringing in guys that were fast. He didn't go get just a bunch of big guys, slow guys, like pocket passer that, or an option. Like he got guys that he knew his system and what he was about to do and what he thought that he could run at a high level. His philosophy, and then brought in the guys, right? Or you use Dion kicked out 80 kids essentially, right? And brought in a bunch of guys because he knew what he was trying to build, that culture, this half in, half out isn't for, like, it wasn't what he was trying to run, right? And then and then that's where then he gets to then flourish in his position is like, I don't know if you saw recently, is kind of empowering, just bringing it up is like their best player got hurt a couple weeks back, gets, he calls basically, is like, yo, coach, I'm playing this week against USC. And he was like, I told him, you got to get healthy. Like, we're trying to have you healthy for later on in life to, play where your goals are at, and not
Yeah.
play against, some team this week just because you want to play.
For sure.
Right. And it's like, now he's flourishing as a coach. The players are, flourishing. It's like, and then, give perspective. Like, again, oh, they lost against Oregon. Like, they might be the best that those players can possibly be, and you don't know. But just because they lost to Oregon, like, they might not have won any game if anyone else was their coach.
sure.
Who knows? But
Yeah.
like
Well,
with that too, it's
yeah.
like understanding your system, understanding those players, and then also too, like what I think he does a really good job of too is bringing other people in that can also help where he falls short in some instances. Like,
Yeah.
he's really good at what he does, and like, but he's not over there training the quarterbacks himself. Like,
Yeah.
he's not over there
100%.
training the O linemen. Like, he brings in guys to help with that, and
Yeah.
he seeks help, and he seeks guidance, and he seeks information in those fields,
Yeah.
so he can better than,
Yeah.
push in one direction, if that's what you want to call it. But
For sure.
but yeah, no, definitely. And then too, just like, nobody else is a part of that system. No one's gonna run that team like Dion can. No one's gonna run that team like Belichick can. And if you think you could, just watch the Raiders. Sorry, Jarrell. That's why they suck, because he
went
thought
there,
he
Jay.
could.
Sorry.
So he thought he could, and he can't, and that's why they're not the Patriots.
Mhm.
And so, but yeah, ultimately, and then too, like, that doesn't mean don't
Well,
keep
and
trying to
then-
get better,
And
but
then you also have to get the same thing too, like the systems we put it together. Like for example, a big part of that system, a big part of those systems is also, like you said, in Dion's situation, like he's the GM and he's the coach,
Mhm.
right? Where that's different. Where it's like obviously coaches,
Yeah.
like when the GM knows what that they have. But like for example, if you put somebody in a system where they can't, like if the Athletics try to run their organization like the Yankees, they're gonna fail.
Mhm.
Even though the Yankees are a better organization, and go, oh man, we should try to be like the Yankees. We don't have the payroll of the Yankees. We don't have the money
The
flow. We
location,
don't have the
the
capital of the
history.
Yankees. We don't have the history. We don't have the fan attendance. We don't
Yeah.
have all these other things. So we have to do things differently
Mhm.
for a system that would work for this. And also too, if you want to pull fans and sell out your stadiums, guess what? Like let's say like I'm like our boys out there at Savannah Bananas, right? Like if you want to get people to come watch the games and doing whatever, they can't just go, well, we're going to have the best baseball players on the field, and we're going to have Alex Rodriguez is going to play for. Well, I say that now. They'll have Alex
They're probably
Rodriguez. on the
right,
thing.
yeah.
But I mean, like again, along with it, right? Is like having these big pros and those things. Like they're not the MLB.
Mhm.
That's a different product.
Mhm.
They created a different product that filled seats, that did all these other things, and their system, right, and their approach to business, and their approach to gameplay, and their approach to playing music the whole game, and getting the fans involved, and doing all those other things. They made something that worked within the constraints that they had, and the same exact thing too as well for, like, again, an organization or team or whatever. We can do things that other people can't do because of how we structured the business. We can do things that other people can't do because I'm not in the NCAA and I don't have a clock on me of how much time I can spend with an athlete. I can do things that other people can't do because of all of those differences and constraints across the board too. And it's like, again, along with it, if you put the wrong GM with the wrong coach, it's not going to go really well
Yeah.
because he doesn't have the pieces to run his system,
Mhm.
right? And then the opposite way, if the coach can't adapt to the players that they currently have and create a new system or a new approach of how this team is going to play, and then most coaches know, right? Like they get into the season, it's like, okay, great. We're not going to hit a bunch of home runs. We're not going to be, a big extra base hit team too. So we're going to have to scratch and claw. We're going to, we can really pitch it. We can play good defense. We're going to have to, play some old school baseball and scrap here and like get some runs in. Great. Like a lot of teams are operating like that. So like that's a different type of system comparatively to like my last year that I played. It's like we led all of college baseball on every level in home runs. We played a little different. We swung and missed a little bit more. We did those other things, but also too, along with that, then you also put on that as well. Like we also struck out a lot of people. Like that was, again, that's how our team was set up. So we could play that way. But if you don't have a team that can do that, like those systems and that way of playing is not going to work.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's like, it's just understanding like all of that, together, and like how you can get people the best results and like doing what with who and what time.
Mhm.
Yeah. It was
Yeah,
good.
that answered everything I had.
Cool. I prayed out. All right, cool. Dear Father, thank you so much for just being with us here, God. And we just ask that you continue to open our eyes just to different perspectives, God. And just, God, we're still trying to understand your creation. We're still trying to understand how you moved and all the things and intricacies and the ways that you continue to move in our lives and our hearts and the world around us. And we just ask for your eyes and your vision, God, so that we can see the world like you do. We know that even when we get a glimpse of your perspective, God, it fills us and drives us forward. and gives us hope and direction in our lives. And we just ask that you continue to do that. And we ask all these things in Jesus' mighty name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Well, until next time, Farm System out.